and welcome back. We have had two wonderful sessions so far and are about to dive into our third. So, right now, we're going to talk about one of our industry's hottest topics, the new Google Analytics, GA4. So, to walk us through Google Analytics 4, I am pleased to welcome two of my colleagues at InfoTrust, Jimmy Love and Jake Allspaw. Both Jimmy and Jake work with our CPG industry team at InfoTrust and have already helped implement GA4 for some of the world's best known CPG brands. So with that, I ask you all to please fire as many GA4 related questions into the chat as possible. There will be a time at the end of this session for some Q&A with Jimmy and Jake. So please, any question you have about GA4, please submit. And with that, take it away, Jimmy and Jake.
Awesome. Thanks for that intro, Chase. Before we get started, I did want to thank both Lucas and Shafi for their insightful commentary on navigating privacy laws and the new reality we're all living in, how these changes are shaking up CPG organizations when it comes to marketing and analytics. No matter how much I think I know about privacy from learning from them in the past, I always seem to learn something new when listening to those two brilliant minds talk about it. So appreciate that. But now we're moving on to a different but very related topic of digital analytics. So I'd like to introduce myself, Jimmy Love, and my colleague Jake Allspaw will be taking over for me shortly, both members of our CPG industry team here at InfoTrust. Next slide. In today's presentation, very excited to discuss Google Analytics 4 and what CPG organizations need to know about it. So first, what is GA4? Well, it's the next iteration of Google Analytics. So you can think of the ubiquitous universal analytics that we all know and love as essentially being GA3. If you're familiar with Firebase for mobile apps, GA4 combines the best of both worlds from universal analytics and Firebase. At initial launch, GA4 was actually called App Plus Web due to how brilliantly a GA4 property can combine data from multiple streams. But it truly is the next evolution of Google Analytics, whether you plan to use it on your organization's websites, applications, or as a combined data source for both. Right now, GA4 has not reached full parity with Universal Analytics yet, full feature parity, I should say. But it introduces new and improved features, some of which I'll be discussing today, and others that are still on the roadmap for the rest of the year and will continue to roll out in the first half of 2022. Next slide. In a much more visual manner, I do like this slide because it showcases how GA4 really is the best of both worlds when it comes to the features that, as I mentioned earlier, we know and love from Universal Analytics, but it steals the enormously successful events and parameters model that powers Firebase for mobile apps. Next slide. Most advanced analysts have some pain points with Universal Analytics, and Google seems to have addressed a lot of those headaches while planning and rolling out GA4. First, you may have had your apps and websites collecting data in separate platforms, as I mentioned, such as Universal Analytics and Firebase. GA4 actually resolves that with its unified event data collection model. Or perhaps some frustration with an excessively long ETL, extract, transform, load, for activating data and audience targeting. Now new and improved with predictive analytics for remarketing, while still keeping all of the media platforms like SA360, DV360, and CM, as well as ads, keeping all those media platform integrations intact with GA4. And in general, finding the answers to your CPG organization's questions in Universal Analytics can sometimes be a bit time consuming and sometimes honestly not even possible due to dimension scoping issues that may have occurred when you were implementing Universal Analytics. With GA4's hit-based event model, sorry, I lost track. With GA4's hit-based event model, custom reporting tends to be much more flexible. GA4 actually has an Explore Hub, which is basically a white space for reporting, where you can use it to create custom charts, tables, funnels, and path exploration. The latter, my personal favorite, the new path exploration reports, are an absolute game changer and a huge improvement over some of the behavior flow reports that we know from Universal Analytics, for example. Next slide, please. And just to quickly showcase how big of a difference an event-based model can make in simplifying reporting, many of the common data points we know so well from Universal Analytics have actually all been replaced with an event. So page views are now events, along with transactions, internal clicks, chat interactions, site searches, form submissions, customer reviews. Really, just about any interaction on your website or app will now be an event with GA4. Mix in some parameters, which are basically additional information about an event, and you can get some of the same data points as Universal Analytics, but with a lot more simplicity and flexibility. Parameters really are key here, as they essentially replace the traditional category action and label that we apply to Universal Analytics events. Instead, we can now use a parameter to give us that extra information that we need to know about the events that are taking place, and we are not limited to just the 3 of category action and label. So if a user is watching a video event will fire, because that's an on-site interaction, and those are all events. And then parameters associated with that event can tell us, for example, the name of the video being watched, or what percentage was watched, or for example. And it's also worth noting that any event that you deem to be considered a high value action or a key performance indicator, a KPI on your website or app, can be configured as a conversion event, which has replaced what we know of as goals in Universal Analytics. So once again, we're not losing features or reports when you're migrating and looking at GA4 over Universal Analytics. We're just seeing some core differences in the data collection model, in the name and emphasis on flexibility and customizability. Next slide, please. And speaking of key differences between metrics in Universal Analytics versus GA4, here are some big ones that will change. Sessions do still exist, but you can kiss bounce rate goodbye, which is honestly very welcome news to any web analyst who knows how easy that metric is to manipulate. Session duration and average time on page are also replaced with much better engagement metrics, which is another simplified and welcome change in my opinion. Hopefully those of you that manage media campaigns are excited about the new remarketing opportunities that arise with all these new engagement metrics. And as a side note, the list here on the screen, it's not comprehensive, but it does help showcase, not a comprehensive list of all of the metrics and their replacements, but it does help showcase yet again that Google really is using GA4 and emphasizing simplicity and flexibility in this new web analytics platform. Next slide, please. And on the topic of simplicity, with Universal Analytics, we would often recommend implementing a standard list of events when talking to our CPG clients. Common events such as scroll tracking or outbound link tracking, video engagement, file downloads, and others in that vein. With GA4, it does seem like Google kind of heard our pleas. And instead of requiring us to add these custom events manually, they've given us the opportunity to simply toggle these common events on and off right in the GA4 interface. Jake will actually talk about the API a little bit more shortly, but since this summit is obviously aimed at CPG organizations with dozens or hundreds of websites, I'm excited to let you know that these automatically collected events, and known as enhanced measurement, can be enabled or disabled at scale via the GA4 API. Next slide, please. There are 4 key benefits when discussing GA4 properties, some of which obviously we've already touched on already: scalability, durability, machine learning technology, and of course, how all of these should drive a positive impact on your business. Next slide, please. But specifically for CPG organizations, GA4 will still have many of the same benefits of Universal Analytics as far as a robust API. You'll still be able to use user groups in your Google marketing platform and other automation and programmatic capabilities that allow us to roll out changes or updates at scale to your large organization. As mentioned before, the streamlining of key touch points and events across hundreds of digital assets can now be done with the click of a toggle in the GA4 UI. And really the value of these automatic enhanced measurement events cannot really be overstated. These events provide valuable data points, but require no updates within your tag management system, nor requirements from your development teams, which we all know can become significant hurdles and bottlenecks. So put simply, GA4's event and parameter-based measurement allows for flexible custom reporting rather than some of the issues we come across in universal analytics with hit scope versus user scope versus session scope dimensions simply not blending together well in custom reports or in the interface. And finally, while this presentation won't be going into detail because it would honestly merit its own 30-minute session, it's absolutely worth checking out some of the machine learning, AI capabilities, and automated reports that GA4 generates. Next slide, please. So what should you do right now? First and foremost, I would suggest taking an inventory of your current Universal Analytics events, custom dimensions, custom metrics, and goals, and begin translating them into the GA4 framework. Begin working on this with your analytics and development teams because you need to start understanding how to most efficiently deploy these changes across a large number of websites. Then, and perhaps most importantly, be sure to dual tag your website right away with GA4 so that you can at least begin to collect that basic page view and enhanced measurement data immediately. And finally, I would recommend familiarizing yourself with the GA4 interface and consider some hands-on training. For me, at least, the best way to learn a new platform is to get in there, play around with it, check out the new Exploration Hub, rather than learning from screenshots or training presentations. Next slide, please. And by preparing now, your CPG organization will be rewarded later. So perhaps utilizing machine learning and an artificial intelligence can give you an edge over your competition that's likely not using it yet. Events, parameters, and conversion events can now all be configured today in your GA4 properties. So I mentioned we're not quite at full feature parity, but many of those are integrations and other low-level features. But the core of GA4 is ready to go today with events, parameters, and conversion events. You can even actually use your existing Universal Analytics data layer to capture some of those valuable data points. So don't think you need to get your development team involved right away. And before I wrap up, I do want to mention a few key concerns that we've been hearing from organizations. I'm not currently monitoring chat, but they could very well be in there right now. And that is, first and foremost, you will not experience any data loss in your Universal Analytics properties by rolling out that GA4 and doing what we describe as dual tagging. The two will live side by side as completely different tags, completely separate platforms that won't impact data collection in one or the other. And secondly, Google will not double charge enterprises using the 360 version of both Universal Analytics and GA4. So another key question we've often been getting that I wanted to try to get in front of for you all. And finally, arguably the most important part of preparing for GA4 now and getting that GA4 tag set up so you have dual tagging is to begin collecting some of that sweet month over month and year over year data for future analysis when GA4 becomes your organization's web analytics platform of truth, likely sometime next year in 2022. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll actually be handing it over to my colleague, Jake Alspaugh, for information on GA4 architecture opportunities very relevant to CPG organizations.
Thank you, Jimmy. So with our mindset on preparing for Google Analytics 4, let's take a look at what opportunities it presents in terms of account architecture. For larger organizations, this is a crucial piece of your analytics implementation. Now, I know the shift to new technologies and systems such as GA4 can be overwhelming just on its own. So overhauling your account setup may be the last thing on your mind, but this shift does present an opportunity to re-examine your account architecture and make any necessary changes. So let's see how we can take advantage of that opportunity. So as you're planning, it might be helpful to ask yourself a few questions. First, do I like my current Universal Analytics architecture? Is it working for us or against us? Are the right people able to access the right data and reports that they need for their job and do so in a timely manner? Do new team members know exactly what each property represents? Next, consider limits. Will we hit property limits in our GA accounts if we're adding GA4 properties to existing accounts? Will we need new accounts set up because of this? And finally, what data needs to be combined in a roll-up property, for example, at the enterprise level? Is this done by brand or by market or region? Having answers or at least general direction for these questions will be crucial. As Jimmy mentioned just before here, preparation is key. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some potential architectures for CPG and multi-brand organizations. So these are some common architectures we've seen used for our partners. You're certainly not limited to these, but hopefully seeing them will get the wheels turning for how you might organize your accounts at your organization. The base framework from top to bottom goes account, property, app or web data streams, then subproperties, with account being the most general and subproperty being the most specific. So how you architect your accounts here depends on a couple of things. First, who needs access to what data? For example, is your organization divided by brand or by market or region? Do certain agencies or vendors need access to specific accounts or properties? This will determine how you first break apart your accounts. And it also depends, as I mentioned earlier, on how you need to combine data. If you're combining data at the market level, you might break out your accounts that way. This way you can add roll-up properties to combine that data by market. Ultimately, find what works best for your organization. Maybe get out a whiteboard and brainstorm some options. Interview your stakeholders to see what could work best for them. Identify the pain points they're experiencing and see where you can improve. Hit the next slide here. So as you're planning, rest assured that there is flexibility. The good news is that none of this is set in stone once you decide. So if you change your mind about your architecture or realize something's just not working as intended, you can migrate your properties between accounts as well as rename them as needed. So here we'd encourage you to simply choose the best option. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. Do a rollout test of GA4 on a couple of accounts and see what you can learn from those tests. Check in with your stakeholders and see how it's working, and then you can iterate accordingly. And to Joanna's point at the beginning of the summit, where she quoted Adam Grant, think like a scientist. Run small scale experiments on a single market and see what you can learn about your architecture from there, and then scale it up. And in terms of flexibility, this last piece is less common, but if you need a separate roll-up type property that spans multiple GA accounts, you can always add a second GA4 property to those sites. For upgraded enterprise accounts, this will have hit and cost implications, but it could be an option if you need to break away from your standardized architecture. And for organizations that aren't using the enterprise version of GA4, this second tag could be a method for getting data like rolled up by brand or market for multiple sites. So all that to say, there is flexibility and use that to your advantage as you're planning. You can hit the next one here. So some even better news beyond the flexibility. For larger organizations that have dozens or even hundreds of websites, as Jimmy mentioned earlier, GA4 properties can be configured programmatically using the API. And this would include your app and web data streams, the enhanced measurement features, and the configuration tags and triggers in Google Tag Manager. It's worth mentioning that not every feature could be automated, but at minimum, you can have your properties configured and deployed across your sites. Once you have your architecture established, your GA4 rollout could be done very quickly. With the right team of engineers, GA4 properties and tags could be rolled out in a matter of hours or just a few days. We had one partner who was able to do this across 600 sites in various markets in just a couple of days. So a ton is made possible with the API. So to wrap things up on GA4, here's what we'd like you to take away if it's just a few things. First and foremost, finalize your ideal GA4 account and property architecture. Second, dual tag GA4 alongside Universal Analytics as soon as possible. Even today, you could throw up a few tags on some sites you want to test. Next, begin learning the GA4 interface. So once you have data coming in, get to know the reports, play around with some of the new features, because soon it will be your organization's source of truth. Examine the current event framework, begin translating those to GA4 events. And then finally, if you do have dozens or hundreds of sites, consider using the API. So thank you everyone for tuning in here. We did want to save some time here for any questions that may have come in, since we know GA4 is new. So Jimmy can come back and we can field those from the chat if you want to drop any questions there.
All right, guys, thank you so much. That was awesome. And the chat is alive with GA4 questions. So hope you guys are ready. All right, so first one, what new GA4 feature or benefit do you think will be most valuable for multi-brand organizations?
I mean, I think we covered so many that are so important for CPG organizations. I think obviously the new event-based model will just allow for a lot more flexibility and custom reporting. I think the machine learning and artificial intelligence capabilities allow for automated insights. That's huge. The GA4 API looks to be as robust, if not more so, than the Universal Analytics API. I think the enhanced measurement for some of the less mature organizations that today don't have an advanced data layer, don't have custom dimensions, but the fact that the enhanced measurement automatically allows for scroll tracking, file download tracking, external link tracking, video tracking, things that honestly you'd only really see in organizations with at least a middle of the line types of analytics maturity. Now you'll see from even the most basic bare bones implementations. And I think those are very valuable data points for analysts with, again, no customizations in the data layer and no customizations required in your tag management system. So there's just a couple for you. If you want to add any more, Jake.
Yeah, I would reiterate the machine learning piece for advanced organizations and then the enhanced measurement for more basic organizations. Either way, that's going to speed you up, which is crucial for a large organization where you're doing things at scale.
Awesome, thank you. Next question from the chat. This is from Luis. How do we work on user ID? Does custom dimension equal user properties?
So that would be you'd have to use a user scoped custom parameter for user ID. Previously, again, GA4 is still evolving. We're seeing a lot of changes in the interface. Previously, that would have been known as a user property. We're now calling them user scoped custom parameters. And that's how you would capture a user ID or any other CRM ID. So that should hopefully answer that question. Definitely something Google would not have dropped in GA4.
All right, question from Abigail. What are the property limits in GA4 if accounts are organized by country view?
So it's 100, and it's the same as Universal Analytics. You can actually have your accounts can actually have both Universal Analytics properties and GA4 properties in them. As Jake was kind of alluding to, I think one of the more exciting things with GA4 is it's a fresh opportunity to start with a new architecture. So, and by doing, of course, a new architecture, you're not going to have your UA properties and GA4 properties fighting each other for those 100 maximum that you're allowed per account. It is also worth noting that there is a way to increase that. I know for sure available with Enterprise. If you have a 360 license, you can increase it to beyond 100. But with the free version, I know Google caps it typically at 100. So hopefully that helps. But hopefully you're also considering a brand new architecture, because maybe the decision to go country-based or market-based 7 or 8 years ago when you were focusing on Universal Analytics, maybe all those reasons have gone to the wayside and you're looking at an opportunity for a fresh start with GA4.
All righty. If we have the Universal Analytics version of GA360, what's the rush to move to GA4?
I'd say preparation at this point, preparing for when GA4 does become your source of truth. So the sooner you implement it on your site, the more historical data you're going to have, the more opportunities you'll have to test and learn. And then when it does become the source of truth, you'll have done all the prep work necessary.
And we don't know exactly when Universal Analytics will sunset. I know we have a few Googlers on today's call. I don't think you'll get an answer from them either. But it is going to, inevitably, they're going to stop supporting it. It will be sunsetted in the future. So, there's really no disadvantage to getting your dual tagging set up right now, as we've continued to mention, for that historical data when you begin using it as your source of truth. But, due to the inevitable future lack of support and sunsetting of it, whenever that may be, it's good to start learning GA4 now, so it won't come as a surprise and you won't have that historical data when you do start using it regularly.
Awesome. And a similar question from Ethel in the chat. We are revamping our website in 2022. Is it best to shift to GA4 when we launch our new website?
I would say keep both as you're shifting, because to Jimmy's point a moment ago, we don't know exactly when that shift will happen. So I would retain your UA property on your new site, and I would place GA4 on your current site now, and then you get all of that comparison data as you're shifting one over to the new year and then also to your new site.
All right. How would you recommend starting to position GA4 for brands and markets who are utilizing or who are used to utilizing UA data for key business decisions, and thus would need to transition over to GA4, I think, in the coming quarters?
I would say it's establishing familiarity, spend time in the report. So, to our point earlier, if you're tagging your sites now, you're beginning to collect that data. Those brands can do analysis in both platforms and get some familiarity with how those reports are changing, how they're remaining similar. So do a little bit of side-by-side analysis for now in both platforms. That way you're familiarizing yourself with the changes.
All right. Is there a certification available for GA4? This question comes from James.
That's a good. I don't know if Google has a GA4 certification yet. I honestly have not personally taken it. I know the GAIQ, which all consultants and InfoTrust, I do recommend taking for a great Universal Analytics exam. I know that's still focused on Universal Analytics because I re-upped on it recently. But do you know, Jake? I'm not sure if there's one available today. And if anyone in chat knows, by all means, feel free to reply in chat as well.
I have not seen the test yet, no.
I'm sure there will be. And I know, there's a lot of comprehensive guides on GA4, which isn't really a test, but it's a great place to read and learn. And certainly on our website, certainly on all of Google's support pages. Cool. So quite a few resources, but not familiar with a certification exam in existence today.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Jake and Jimmy. I do want to keep us on schedule. This was a very insightful session on Google Analytics 4.